that better? Appreciate you all coming out. I've been going through the book of Genesis, chapter 1, as I'm sure most of you are aware. The whole first chapter I've just decided to call Order Out of Chaos, and I think it's probably the slowest that I've ever gone through a chapter, and I know I could go a whole lot slower yet. There's so much that could be said on each verse, each phrase, often each word. Take the word light and search it through the scripture. Sometime you'll find hundreds and hundreds of times that the word comes up, sometimes just in reference to physical light, many other times in reference to knowledge, to understanding, to information. And so the sermons around this topic could go on and on and on, but I don't want to bore you, and nor do I understand much of what's being said, or there's so many different ways in which I don't understand these passages that I'm just kind of briefly touching on the things that catch my attention and excite me, and that touch on other references throughout the scriptures as I'm speaking. So thank you for praying for us already, Abe, too, and with that, I'm just going to get right into it. I'm going to read a couple verses that we touched on last time, and then get into the next verses that we want to study. God saw the light, that it was good. In verse 4. And God divided the light from the darkness. And God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And the evening and the morning were the first day. God divided light from darkness, and we can get into that more a little bit later, but God's not satisfied that darkness be mingled together with light. He wants them separated. He wants them divided from one another. Verse 6, and God said, day 2, the beginning of day 2, let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters, let it divide the waters from the waters. And God made the firmament and divided the waters which were under the firmament from the waters which were above the firmament, and it was so. Again, we see God dividing. There is a mishmash of everything, all chaotic in this globe or whatever it might have been before day 1, but God started it in order. He established day 1, he established a pattern. I think he set the globe on its axis perhaps and began the rotation so that it would have some kind of order and semblance of order in it. And then he doesn't call it good yet. He just says, day 1 is this. He saw the light that it was good, but he didn't call the light and the darkness together good. He just called the light good. And I think that's fairly significant. And now here he's taking that mass of water. The Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters, it says, because it was just a mass of water. That's all that could be seen if there were eyes to behold it. And here he takes the waters, and now he divides the waters from the waters, and he creates a firmament in between the waters. Now, there's some discrepancy as to what the waters above the firmament are. Many young earth creationists, and I'm not sure where to go on this, have speculated that there was waters just above our heavens, like where the birds fly, where the birds fly in space, where the moon and the stars and all that are. But there's been some scientists and what do they call them in particular? There's physicists who have done studies on that with where the sun is and with the layer of water around the earth. If there was enough water there to kind of flood the whole earth later on in Genesis 6, they believe that the floods broke open that store of water and it came down to earth. If there had been a layer of water there, these scientists theorize that the earth would have been like a greenhouse. It just would have been too hot. There's no way it would have worked that way. So I don't know exactly, but it's an interesting concept, an interesting idea. Others believe that this firmament of water, or the water above the firmament, is beyond our space, beyond the solar system, that there's water out there somewhere, and that our whole solar system and galaxy perhaps is kind of almost in this bubble of air inside the firmament. I don't know, or inside the water. It's really difficult to know because obviously they have taken spaceships now and blasted out through the atmosphere and into space, and they've visited these places, and there's not water that they have to go through to get out there. So where this firmament above the heavens is, I'm not quite sure. But God divided a place for man to breathe and live, and for birds to fly, and for us to have our being in. And even the heavens, where space is, the stars and the sun and the moon, they are also in this firmament. And I know there's 3 different heavens spoken of, but So exactly what is going on there, I don't quite know. But in Genesis chapter 7, verse 11, it says this, and this is why some people have speculated that that store of water above the firmament was broken open. It says, in the 600th year of Noah's life, in the 2nd month, the 17th day of the month, the same day were all the fountains of the great deep broken open, and the windows of heaven were opened. And so that's where some people have speculated that this firmament above, or this waters above the firmament, were that store of where the windows of heaven were open and the waters came down at that time. Because before the flood, the Bible says that it had never rained upon the earth. There was a dew that came up from the earth and it watered everything, and there was very lush, rich, nutrient-dense food to be eaten. And that's where some people have tried to understand how is it that the Bible says men and women lived to be 800 and 900 years old back then. Some have said that this canopy of water kind of protected us from the UV rays maybe and made life altogether just more sustainable and life was more vibrant. Others just say that because genetics had not yet been altered, or because there hadn't been any breakdown of genetics, people were just healthier altogether. Food was of a higher nutrient density, and air was cleaner and all that. We don't know exactly why, but clearly people lived much longer back then. So whether or not that water was just above our firmament here, or whether it's beyond the heavens, the second heavens even, I don't quite know, obviously. God called the firmament heaven, verse 8. And the evening and the morning were the second day. Now here's where there's something interesting to be noticed. That God did not call the work of day 2 good. Some people immediately jump to textual error. They think, well, somebody just forgot to write it in there because he said it is good, it is good, it is good. On all the other days, why wouldn't he say it on day 2? Well, if you look at day 1, it's slightly different there as well, because he says that he divided the water. In day 1 it says he saw that the light, that it was good. And then God divided the light from the darkness and he called the light day. But he doesn't necessarily call light and darkness good, he just calls the light good. And then in day 2, he doesn't even call it good. I'm not saying that it wasn't good, because at the end of the 6 days creation, he looks back and says it is all very good. But it almost as if because the waters being separated from the waters, this division occurs, the work of the waters is not yet done, is my speculation, is my theory. Because on the next day, he divides the waters and brings dry land to cause it to appear, and then he says that this is good. So maybe it's the division. I've heard some people say that God, only thing he did on day 2 was divide waters from waters, and division as a general rule is not usually a good thing. We don't want to be divided, we want to be together. But I don't know exactly why he didn't call it good. But on day 2, he does not call the work that he did good. I think it's because it was not yet complete. No actual creation seems to have taken place, except for that, well, I shouldn't say no actual creation, because oxygen was there, and now there was a breathable, livable, habitable space between the firmament, or between the waters, this place called heaven or firmament. So clearly there was a creation made, but it's like an invisible part of creation. You cannot see air. You cannot see the air that we breathe or oxygen or anything that's in the environment, right? Oxygen and carbon dioxide and all that cannot be seen. So it's a whole day where he just took water away from water and he created a space. There was no actual physical creation made, and he doesn't call it good on that day. But later he calls that whole thing together, he calls it good. So day 3 begins this way. And God said, let the waters under the heaven be gathered together unto one place, and let the dry land appear. And it was so. And I mentioned this last time. That's the verse I stopped on last time. The dry land was there. Whether it was all spread out throughout there, I don't know, or whether the mountains and the continents and everything were already in place and the waters just needed to somehow go back into the earth and maybe find their places. I don't know exactly. But somehow the dry land came together and it appeared. And there was verses we talked about last time, how God stretches the earth above the waters somehow. Clearly it's all got a foundation. It's all connected somewhere at the heart of the earth, but somehow he took the earth and he spread it above the waters. A lot of times you see pictures of islands and stuff, and the living space is like this, but underneath it kind of comes in and it's just resting on this pillar of some sort. So Here he's gathering the water to one place, and the dry land is appearing, and it was so. And God called the dry land earth, and the gathering together of the waters called he seas, and God saw that it was good. So we kind of gloss over a lot of these things, and I have to try to retrain my brain to look into what actually took place there. And like I said, I can't gather it all in my mind. I have such limited knowledge, but we read it over with just oblivious acceptance. We just like, well, yeah, okay, God made the dry land appear, and the water just happened to come to one place. But we have no concept of how that actually happens. In the book of Job, we're going to read here, God defines or describes this event in much greater detail and with much more love and tenderness and care for what he's doing here than what is stated in Genesis chapter 1. In Genesis chapter 1, it's just the dry land appeared. Okay, that's good. Nice, simple, complete, it's done. But look at Job chapter 38. He's talking, challenging Job. Where were you when I did this? Where were you when the sons of God shouted for joy? And so on. Then in verse 8 he says, or who shut up the sea with doors when it brake forth, as if it had issued out of the womb? So you picture that in a totally different sense now, where the waters are just rushing and gushing. Nothing can hold back water. Like, to build a dam is an incredible feat of human ingenuity, to be able to stop water, at least to some degree. They say the hardest element on earth is water, if I'm getting that correct. Like, you can cut through steel with water. When it's pressurized, it's just an incredibly hard thing. And so here now God is separating the waters, and it's bursting forth like a baby from a womb. You men have seen that. You women have experienced that. It bursts out like with water, right? It's a beautiful sight to behold. And here God is describing his creation and his holding back of water with this terminology. It's like he's birthing this thing. Can you see the care and the tenderness that God has for the planet itself, for the water in the seas, and for the earth? God is creating this, and he says, it issued out as if it issued out of the womb. When I made the cloud the garment thereof, and the thick darkness a swaddling band for it. So it's all still complete utter darkness, and he takes the blackness and the darkness and he makes it a blanket for this planet of water. And break up for it my decreed place, and set bars and doors, and said, hitherto shalt thou come, but no further, and here shall thy proud waves be stayed. Now, I know there's scientific ways to explain how God stops the water from just flooding over the land. Maybe it's just the fact that the land is higher. Maybe it's the way that the earth is rotating and keeping everything down, right? Gravity holds all heavy things down to the planet. And I don't know exactly how it all works. But God set those bars and those doors, as Job here describes it, in place so that the water would come so far and no further. It's more than my mind can grasp and how it all functions. I would love to have some scientists or geologists, or what do they call the people that would study land and sea like that, to describe how the tides work and how the waves are held at a certain spot. Right now, the sun and the moon are not there yet. So maybe there isn't a tide. I don't really know how this part would function, how it would work. Because the gravity of the sun and the moon, that the moon forces upon the planet, keeps things in their place and causes the tides to come about. So how this all worked on day 3, I'm not quite fully understanding. But God tells the waters to stay in one place, and they just do as they're told. Proverbs 8:28 says this, when he established the clouds above, when he strengthened the fountains of the deep, when he gave to the sea his decree, that the waters should not pass his commandment, when he appointed the foundations of the earth. And then he goes on to describe more things. But he's saying at the beginning, this is what God did. He established the clouds above. He strengthened the fountains of the deep. We're going to read about that later on in Genesis chapter 6, that the fountains of the deep were broken open and the windows of heaven were opened. So there's stores of water in the earth. Even now, we obviously know that. There's streams and rivers below the surface of our earth where we can tap into and draw water up with our wells. But here he describes it as the fountains of the deep, and he gave the sea his decree. This is how far you're going to go. This is your parameters. This is the limits of the sea, and that's where it was. They should not pass that. And then he appointed the foundations of the earth. Very interesting language. Ecclesiastes 1:7 says this: all the rivers run into the sea, yet the sea is not full. Unto the place from whence the rivers come, thither they return again. And he's talking about this beautiful cycle of water, how it works, right? We see it as the rain coming down, falling upon the mountains, upon the high places, and some of it seeps into the earth, much of it runs off, and there's rivers and gullies and streams that keep flowing and flowing. You follow those rivers along, they end up in a lake. The lakes follow to rivers, bigger rivers that end up in the ocean, and it's all somehow intertwined and connected. I know there's a separation between fresh water and salt water and all that, but it all ends up in the sea, and then yet somehow it ends up back on earth. And there's just this constant cycle where the water is regenerated and it condenses or it evaporates and it goes up into the clouds are established, and then it pours out upon the earth again. I'm sure some of you kids have learned this in science class, what all the different terminology is and how this works. But it's an amazing, beautiful cycle that God established that day that it should function in that way, and it has continued to do so for at least the last 6,000 years that we are aware of. That cycle has just continued and continued and continued, and it's a beautiful and incredible cycle. Established from the beginning, and it has kept in order by the rotation of the earth, by gravity, and so on. And it's interesting to me that the same water, the exact same water droplets that were created in the beginning, that were there before day one, are still the same water that we're using here now. And it's been in and through us. It's been in our bodies. Our bodies, they say, are like 80-90% water. And there's just this weird thing about water being everywhere. And I'm sure there's major significance that maybe some of you could tell us about, and I would gladly listen and hear it out. But water is everywhere. And they actually say that if you take a globe, like a little 17, 18-inch globe, and pull it apart, or a map, and cut all the water out, it's 75%, just surface area, 75% of our globe. That's not the space underneath, like the mass of water and the volume of it, or versus the land mass, but just the surface area of the map is 75% water. It's an incredible amount of our globe is just simply water. We've been using that same water for thousands of years, and it hasn't spoiled. It hasn't been fully contaminated yet. There's this beautiful cycle that purifies and cleanses water. Obviously, certain areas get contaminated. They become poison, E. coli, or whatever gets in there. But ultimately, we're still using that same water, and it's still working. It still has that beautiful recycling function that God created and established in the beginning. When I started this series, I talked about how the beginning speaks about the end. Right near the end of the book of Revelation, Revelation 21:1, when it talks about the new heaven and the new earth, it describes it this way. It says, "And I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth were passed away, and there was no more sea." Does that mean there will be no more water? I don't know, because the Bible talks about the river of life flowing out of the throne of God, so clearly there will be water to some degree. But what is this significance of no more sea? Now, there's many different things that I've speculated that this could indicate. First of all, have you ever thought about the fact that right now we have 7 billion people towards 8 billion people, somewhere in that range, on this planet at one time? How many of them are Christian? I don't know, millions? I would like to think maybe billion. I don't know, I doubt it. But millions and millions of people on this planet right now are trusting Jesus for their salvation. And then the generation that just went by, there was 7 billion people, 40 years ago. Many of them have now died, and they've been replaced by children. And so each generation has gone by over the last 6,000 years. That's billions and billions of people, hopefully, that will be in the kingdom of God and will be resurrected into new glorified bodies and will be on this planet, coming and going in and out of the city of Jerusalem, the new city. And maybe going up into space and coming back down. There's some interesting things that take place at the end with the new heaven and the new earth. But it's going to have to be a lot of land mass to house all the people. So without the seas, maybe that's possible. There's a lot more area, land mass, that could be lived upon. But right now, the way our earth functions, that amount of water is required to sustain life on this planet. How that new earth will function, I can't quite say, but it would be large enough to be inhabited by billions and billions, trillions of people perhaps. Think about the fear and dread that the sea has caused in times past especially. Now that we have air travel, it feels less significant. But for all the generations gone by that traveled by sea or by land, the sea signified the end. You can't go there. There was a few select people who were brave enough and knew the sea enough to be able to get on the water and travel to another continent. But it wasn't until only 400 or 500 years ago that people en masse traveled over to the New World, because it was so disconnected from the ancient world or from the old world, the East. And now we have air travel, so it feels less significant. But think about how much dread, how much fear the open seas have caused. Even seasoned sailors and ship masters have died out there because they cannot control the seas. And it's such a massive, massive place that it's hard to navigate through. And so that would be done away with, the fear and dread of the unknown. And the fact that it separates land masses, that this country is separated by this country with water. Rather, these two countries are separated by water, and you cannot easily go between the different countries. That would be done away with. The mysterious deep and darkness would, alas, be no more. I'm sure some of you have watched documentaries, and I would highly recommend it, like Planet Earth or the Deep Blue something or whatever it's called. There was a really neat one we watched on VidAngel called, I had it this morning. Say it out loud. The Riot and the Dance, that's right. Very good Christian documentary about nature. And it's very intriguing, and it's quite amazing to watch some of these things. But they dive down some of these documentaries, the Deep Blue, what's that one called? I forget. I should have come up with the words, but the Blue Planet, there we go. They dive really, really deep to the point where there's like no sunshine down there, and they've got these fish down there with lights on their heads and crazy things that take place down there that we're only beginning to scratch the surface of and to discover. But it's so deep and dark and mysterious, that would be done away with somehow. There would be no more seas on this new planet. No more buried treasures and secrets down below the waters. The great and terrifying waves that crash against the shores would stop. The tidal waves that come and kill sometimes hundreds of thousands and millions of people would be done. The rise and fall of the tide and the constant change that it brings would perhaps be a thing of the past. Obviously, some of this is speculation because I can't fathom an earth without the seas. But the whole world will work together. We will all worship Jesus. We will all be honoring and serving one king, and there will be no division. There will be no wars between countries. There will be no need for borders and separation. Right now, it's necessary. Right now, it's needed to keep peace and to keep from a country being overrun and all that. It's a good thing here and now. But in that place, there will be no seas to separate one from the other. But here, he creates the seas. In the end, he will do away with the seas on the new earth. Genesis 1:11. God said, "Let the earth bring forth grass, the herb yielding seed, and the fruit tree yielding fruit after his kind, whose seed is in itself upon the earth." And it was so. Years ago, I saw somebody tell the story of creation to young children, and since then, when I tell it, I try to tell it somewhat similarly, and it's always very intriguing. My kids, I've told it to them a bunch of times. Maybe I should retell it to some of the younger ones. I try to go back to these stories again and again, but imagine after day 3, the earth has appeared. It's stretched out, but it's brown, it's rocky, it's ugly, it's covered with soil and dirt, but there's no beauty about it. There's nothing that you'd want to go walking around on. So if you can envision it and picture it in your mind, it's also dark, so there's not much to see, but there's this ugly, dry, or maybe not dry, but just brown, chaotic world that doesn't have any beauty to it. And all with one word, with these words that he here now says, "Let the earth bring forth." So there's seeds inside the earth that God had already previously created, I believe. They're now going to just spring up suddenly. So I tell the children to close their eyes and imagine as the grass just starts popping up. Maybe all at once, the whole earth is covered with grass. Maybe long grass swaying right away, I don't know. Maybe it's just little stubbly stuff, or it pops up individually. And, the guy was making sounds when he told, like, bloop, 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 bloop. You just imagine the earth just bringing forth grass. And then out of the grass suddenly comes out, just a tree erupting out of the ground. And suddenly it's got massive branches and already bearing fruit. I believe that's how creation was. That when he created these trees and the herb yielding seed and the fruit tree yielding fruit, it wasn't that he planted a bunch of little saplings. It was created with age already there. These trees came up and were already producing the fruit that was going to be required to sustain Adam and Eve in only a couple days. So these massive trees come erupting out, those cedar trees down in California that are several thousand years old, that they create holes through and they can drive trucks. Is it cedar, cypress? What is this? Redwoods and the sequoias. Beautiful, massive trees. And you can drive a truck or a car right through. Just incredible. Imagine one of those erupting out of the ground. There was nobody there to see it. But it would have been an incredible thought. And I know you children have enough in imagination where you can picture what that might look like. Would the leaves be shaken off the dirt? I don't know exactly what would happen. But it would just come shooting up out of the ground, and suddenly all the world over becomes green and vegetation is springing up everywhere. Flowers in bloom, perhaps. Just beauty all around. The rivers would have already been there. The waterfalls would already be coming down the rocks, and a lot of beauty, but nothing moving besides that. No fowl of the air, no beasts of the ground, no people there, and not even any light really yet. The light was there in some sense, maybe just day and night were somehow separated from one another, but there's no sun yet to rule the day, no moon yet to rule the night. Just a massive planet that's now separated from, the earth is separated from the waters, and there's greenery appearing everywhere. And it was so. Verse 12, and the earth brought forth grass, and the herb yielding seed after his kind, and the tree yielding fruit, whose seed was in itself after his kind. And God saw that it was good. And the evening and the morning were the third day. So one of the things that I like about creation is that it speaks to me of the gospel. When Jesus was on the cross, he cried out, "It is finished," meaning the work of salvation is now complete. It's done. It's been set in motion. Anyone else who now comes from that day after and trusts Jesus, there's nothing that you need to do to add to the work of Jesus. It's completely done. All you need to do is enter into it. And in the same way with creation, much of the ecosystem, much of the way our planet functions was set into motion. And after 6 days, God could take his hands off of it, and it has continued to function day in and day out for thousands of years, operating in complete order. It's such a beautiful thing that he has made to where he doesn't need to be constantly turning the earth, right? Like he's not there keeping his hands busy trying to do all this stuff, make it happen. He set something in motion and then said, "I'm done my work," and he could rest. Same way that the gospel speaks to us. So when you think of the way God does a work, it doesn't need his constant maintenance, although the Bible does say that all things are held together by the word of his power. So somehow he's still causing it all to happen, but it's not like he has to constantly be having his mind preoccupied to make sure that everything rotates just so and that the speed stays the same. There's a perfect axis on the planet that causes it to keep spinning the way that it does, with all the different planets set in motion just like they are, and the gravity of everything just keeps it working and functioning just as it is. And same with the tides and the waves, and the grass now has the seed in it, and the herbs have the seed on them. The trees have the seed in the fruit. When they fall to the ground, more fruit trees come up the next year. And it's just this perfect system that doesn't require any work or effort on our part to see the fruit of. When Adam is created later on, he's told now, just go and tend to the garden. And he was at perfect rest. There was nothing for Adam to do to create this planet. It was all set in motion, and it was a perfect self-sustaining ecosystem. Every seed for herbs and each seed for the reproduction of trees and fruit was all there. Think about it even now to this day. If you plant an apple tree or a maple tree, whatever it is, that seed has its origin also right here at the beginning. It came from a tree that came from a tree that came from a tree, and so on and so forth, right back to the beginning. Obviously, we are the same way. But it's just a neat thought for me to think that the environment that we now live in was started by God's word and has been self-sustaining ever since. Many agricultural type of scientists, they don't start with this concept that it was good. And if you look, there's a lot of modern day farmers and even scientists now that are trying to figure out better ways to grow food and crops that's more self-sustaining, where you don't constantly need chemicals and sprays and fertilizers to keep it going. And many of them are trying to emulate what nature does when it's left on its own. Obviously, man needs to tend it. And Adam was put in the garden immediately to tend the garden and to watch over things. Many fruit trees need constant pruning and care to produce properly. So men are necessary, women are necessary to keep things going and functioning and producing properly. But they're trying to look back to see how is it that if you leave a place like a forest, it just produces and reproduces, and it's just constantly lush, soft, brown earth below the soil. You don't need to spray chemicals and fertilizers. Everything just kind of grows together. So some farmers are trying to do what they call, man, my words are slipping on me today. It's a type of farming that really I am very intrigued by, but it's like where everything is working and functioning together, where one thing helps the next thing reproduce. You plant certain shrubs and bushes that attract insects and pests so that the crops you're trying to grow are not going to get demolished by the insects and pests, because they'd rather go there than to your crops. And it's this, you're trying to recreate an ecosystem on your yard that emulates what God put in order back then. But scientists and the agricultural farmers and scientists today, they don't follow this premise. Rather, they want hundreds and thousands of acres of one crop. It's called monocrops or monoculture, where they just want acres and acres and acres of apple trees. It's not natural. It works, it functions, but what do you need to do to keep it going? You have to constantly be spraying. You know, a lot of these chemicals and sprays were not available 200 years ago, and yet the whole earth was eating. They didn't grow, most farmers didn't grow hundreds and hundreds of acres of anything. Most farmers back then grew, like they had 15 or 20 acres, and they would grow beans and corn and this and that and the other thing, right? They had every kind of crop on one little farm. And then farmers realized that they could make a lot more money if they would just have one crop and just specialize in it, mass produce it. And well, how do we keep the bugs and insects from this thing? How do we keep pests from coming? Well, let's cut this seed open and modify it. Let's genetically alter these seeds that God created to work in such a way. And now they've patented these seeds, you know. This wasn't necessarily supposed to be a lesson on Monsanto, but that's where our world has now gone with the way that they use seed. They don't appreciate the natural God-given seed that God made. And they don't want to work within the parameters. This is always our problem as humans. We don't want to work within the parameters that God has designed for us. Rather, we want to try to find ways outside of God's will and then still be able to say, see, this works. Well, yeah, you got to keep pumping more fertilizer, keep pumping more chemicals, keep altering the seed, and then they become resistant to that spray, and then you got to develop some new thing to work with that. And it's this endless cycle of working against God's nature, when I think we were designed to work in it and with it and to tend what God has created. That was all to say that I think there's a case to be made against genetically modified organisms and seeds. I think we ought to leave well enough alone. God created it and it was good, and we should enjoy it and appreciate it the way that God has made it. That also is not like Springfield Bible doctrine that you have to be anti-GMO if you want to come here. I'm just speculating, just thinking about some of these things, right? So hopefully you're with me on that or can follow along with what I'm saying. Man in his wisdom tries to find ways to manipulate and modify, and they've done a fairly successful job in the short term, but man fails to look long term. See, God established a system that would work not just for the present generation. He didn't want Adam to become rich off the land. Rather, he developed an earth and a planet and an ecosystem that would be sustainable for thousands and thousands of years, that would keep regenerating, keep repopulating, keep reproducing over and over and over again, so that every generation could use the same soil and the same environment, the same atmosphere. And yet, we want to be rich right here and now, so I think that's where a lot of this comes from, where we are modifying and changing and trying to manipulate nature. Some farmer said that he used to go out before he understood this new way of looking at the old farming. He said he used to get up in the morning thinking about, what can I go out and kill today? Go out and kill some weeds, go out and kill some pests, go out and kill that, because we got to cause this stuff to grow. So you're spraying and killing all the time. Whereas if you look at it from a natural perspective, it's like, how can I help things to grow and prosper today? It's a much different way of looking at the way the land is supposed to function. So before I jump into day 4, it's interesting to notice that all of that right now is going to have to function throughout the next 24 hours at least. If these are 24-hour periods, which I've always been under the persuasion of, it's all residing in a world that does not yet have a sun and a moon. So it wouldn't be able to be sustained for long, and also animals definitely wouldn't be able to be sustained on this planet yet without the sun and the moon. We require the sun and the energy and nutrients we get from it in order to stay alive. So day 4, God said, "Let there be lights in the firmament of the heaven to divide the day from the night. Let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and for years." Signs, we know there's many signs in the Bible where the sun and the moon are used as indications of times. The blood moon, different signs. The moon will be darkened, the sun will not give its light. We will see these as signs in the future. There's signs in the heavens that spoke to the Magi, the wise men that came. They saw the star in the east and they followed it to Jerusalem, to Bethlehem rather, and they saw that star and it led them directly to the place where Jesus was residing at the time. That was a sign in the heavens. And so he said the firmament in the heavens, the sun and the moon and the stars, will be for signs, and then for seasons, for days, and for years. Apparently, the 12 hours, or the 12 and 24-hour clock that we now have is dictated by certain stars called the decans, decans, D-E-C-A-N-S. The ancient Egyptians apparently discovered these. Watching the stars at night, they would notice these certain stars show up every hour. So they came up each hour. And then obviously the day is evening and morning. So now they have the days, and then every time the new moon would come, that would be 1 month. So months, days, years, and even hours were not concepts that man decided, well, I think this would work good. Let's separate the days into 12, 24 hours. It was dictated to us. It was discovered by humanity that this is the cycle that God has given us. So when you have a watch on your hand and it's telling perfect, accurate time, that's a creation of God. It was placed that way so that there would be 24 hours in one cycle of the moon, or one cycle of the earth, so that one day would equal 24 hours. And there's some science there that I don't quite understand, where it's actually 23 hours and 30 some odd minutes, but with the axis of the moon or the axis of the earth and the way it all functions, it adds up somehow exactly to 24 hours. And I wasn't going to try to explain that because I didn't quite fully understand it myself. But somehow we interpret it and see it as exactly 24 hours every single day. And it's a beautiful cycle that God created. The only form of time and ways that we are distinguish between time that is not given in these early chapters and that is not found in nature from what I can see is the week, the 7-day week. We get it from creation here because he created all things in 6 days. The 7th day he rested, so that's the cycle, 6 days, 7 days. But there's nothing from what I understand in the cycle of the moon or the spinning of the earth or the solar system or the galaxies that indicates that we should tell time by 7-day increments. But God revealed to us his plan that he created all things in 7 days. And I found it interesting to note, I want to look into this further, but the Bible talks in the book of Revelation about the 7 spirits of God that are before the throne. You know that passage? Somebody mentioned that there's very likely each of those spirits are set to govern one aspect of creation. Day 1, let there be light. Day 2, this. Day 3, that. And each spirit maybe is governing and functioning on each of those days. I don't know. That's speculation for me. I'd have to study that further. But it's interesting to note. Clearly the number 7 is a very significant number in the Bible. So the days are clear throughout astronomy, throughout the cycle of the earth. Hours are clear. Months are clear. Year is clear. But weeks is something that's an interesting revelation. So he creates the sun and the moon, and it says, let them be for lights, verse 15, in the firmament of the heaven to give light upon the earth. And it was so. And God made 2 great lights, the greater light to rule the day and the lesser light to rule the night, he made the stars also. Just throwing that in there. Just as a side note, and some people who are under this persuasion of creation like I am, where they believe the gap in Genesis 1 before Genesis chapter 2, that gap that was there. Some believe that the stars were already there, and that's why they're millions of light years away and whatever else. And then here he's just saying, oh, by the way, the stars, he made those also, but I don't know. It says it right here, in this day, so I take it as to mean that that's the day he created them or made them. I don't know for sure, but it's an interesting thought. So 2 great lights, the sun and the moon. And we know there's more moons way out in the solar system, and there's more stars out there that are as large as the earth or as large as the sun. So these 2 great lights he created for the earth specifically to keep order. One of my favorite psalms that I like to go to, Psalm 19. I'll read the first 6 verses. Psalm of David. And they used to sing this as a hymn, obviously, or a psalm. The heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament showeth his handiwork. Day unto day uttereth speech, and night unto night showeth knowledge. There is no speech or language where their voice is not heard. Their line is gone out through all the earth, and their words to the end of the world. In them hath he set a tabernacle for the sun, which is as a bridegroom coming out of his chamber, and rejoiceth as a strong man to run a race. His going forth is from the end of the heaven, and his circuit unto the ends of it, and there is nothing hid from the heat thereof. Obviously, we could get into all the different science and stuff behind that, and how science has discovered many of these things to be very accurate statements. But to me, just the idea that every culture, every civilization, no matter what language they speak, they can count days, they can count months, they can count years. They understand seasons, they understand spring and harvest. Obviously, certain parts of the earth don't get the winters that we get, but there's still cycles. There's the rainy season, there's the dry season, there's the season for planting and the season for harvesting. And it's every culture, every generation has understood these things, and there's no language or voice where the glory of God is not speaking into it. And they can all look up to the heavens and consider the heavens and see the glory of God shining back at them. They can all understand the solar system and the seasons. And the astronomy and the information that we have available to us today is gathered together from generations and generations of many different cultures who have discovered many things about the earth and the solar system. And we've collaborated, and now we know probably more about it than ever before, I would think. And it's quite incredible, the things that we're learning. It's all based on this rhythmic consistency of the sun and the moon and the rotation of the earth. And every language can understand this wonder. And not only can they discover the wonders of astronomy and cycles, but each and every group of people is put in awe at the great expanse of the heavens and the wonder of created order. We think of the sun, I think we should also think of Jesus. Jesus says this in John chapter 8, verse 12. Then spake Jesus again unto them, saying, I am the light of the world. He that followeth me shall not walk in darkness, but shall have the light of life. And I know there's way more in this first chapter of the Bible that speaks to us of Jesus than I'm understanding yet. There's many things yet to be discovered, but you think about darkness in this world, and then what comes in to bring light? Jesus comes in. Jesus is not a physical light, although in the book of Revelation, in the new heaven and the new earth, it says that the Lamb will be the light of the city. So some way maybe he will provide physical light. But here he is the spiritual light, the spiritual awareness of truth and righteousness and goodness. That's Jesus. So if you're looking for an image of who Jesus is in this world, in the physical, the sun is probably the best illustration of that thing. And even the triune God, I know there's no perfect illustration, but when you say, oh, the sun feels so nice on my skin, you're obviously not talking about the ball of fire out in the space. You're talking about the rays that you feel from the heat of the sun, right? When the children ask, what causes the plants to grow? You say, well, the sun is doing that. Well, no, the sun is way over there. Clearly not the sun. The sun is not over here causing the plants to grow. But no, the plants draw nutrients from the sun that cause it to grow. So which is it? Is that the sun, or is this the sun that I'm feeling, or is that the sun that's causing the plants to grow? Well, yes, all three. So the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, though distinct and separate and individual, they have their roles, but they're all one. It's all the Son. It's all God. And so again, it's not a perfect illustration, but the sun is a beautiful image of Jesus, the light of the world, and the triune God. So each day we see the sun bursting forth in that glorious sunrise, and people worship it. And they get up early in the morning just so that they can watch the sunrise. We did this in Mexico and watched it come up over the waves. And there was many others gathered with us because they all wanted to see the sun bursting forth and starting a new day for us here on this side of the planet. We see it bursting over the horizon like a bridegroom after the wedding night. The wedding night is the time when the bridegroom finally gets to have his bride. He's been holding off. He's been saying no to his drives. He's been tempted, but he said, no, I will not. And finally, he gets to have his bride, and he gets to rejoice with her, the bride of his youth. And they consummate the marriage, and the next day, he bursts forth and says, guys, I'm a man, look at me. He wants the whole wedding celebration, the feast, to know, I have made it official. She is my bride. They would have 7-day wedding feasts in the Jewish custom. And part of it was the celebration, then the bride and the bridegroom would go off to their place, and then they would come back out and celebrate with the rest of the people. And her virginity was gone, and they were now one, and it was a beautiful consummation and a celebration. And so he said, the sun is like that. That again is like Jesus. Jesus is coming back for his bride. And he will rejoice over us with singing, it says. And there will be a massive celebration like we've never seen in heaven, where all the beasts, the 24 elders, and all the church will fall down and worship Jesus on the throne. And this is what the sunrise speaks to us of every morning. For thousands of years, they didn't know that the sun was speaking about what God was going to do in Jesus, and yet it does. Each sunrise, you can anticipate the coming of Jesus. When your life feels miserable and depleted and too much, and you're stressed, and you're worn out, and you're sad, and you're lonely, think each morning of the sunrise that there's a new opportunity. His grace is new every morning, right? That's found in the Psalms as well. But each day speaks to us that there is hope beyond the horizon. There is light after the night. There is joy in the morning. And Jesus will come back for us. The joy and the pomp of the King celebrating his new bride is like the sun coming out over the horizon. It says here, like a strong man running a race. You watch an Olympic sprinter and every muscle is tense and his face is usually relaxed, but each muscle is just intently looking forward. That's the sun breaking out over the horizon. And each day it does this with the same anticipation, with the same joy, with the same excitement. That sun just keeps coming around from what we can tell. But for us, it's actually the planet turning and over and over and over again. But that sun is bursting forth each day to greet every new day the same way. Verse 17, and God set them in the firmament of the heaven to give light. Sorry, I skipped one verse that I was going to read. I read this one last week, but it's worth mentioning here again, Romans 1:20. I probably messed Abe up a little bit there. For the invisible things of him from the creation of the world are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse. So there's so much that we can gather from who God is by observing his physical creation, because it speaks to us of the invisible God that he is. It indicates to us his Godhead. Even like I shared with you the sun, the 3 parts of the sun, the 3 things that it accomplishes and does, speaks to us of the triune nature of the Godhead. Verse 17 of Genesis 1. And God set them in the firmament of the heaven to give light upon the earth, and to rule over the day and over the night, and to divide the light from the darkness. And God saw that it was good. Another account here in Jeremiah 31, verse 35 through 37. Thus saith the Lord, which giveth the sun for a light by day. See the cross-reference? And the ordinances of the moon and of the stars for a light by night, which divideth the sea when the waves thereof roar. The Lord of hosts is his name. And then here he says, if those ordinances depart from me, the sun stops turning, the moon stops causing gravity, if the earth's cycle stops somehow, if that were ever to happen, if those ordinances depart from me, thus saith the Lord, then the seed of Israel also shall cease from being a nation before me forever. Thus saith the Lord, if heaven above can be measured, and the foundations of the earth searched out beneath, I will cast off all of the seed of Israel for all that they have done, saith the Lord. Tony touched on this morning. Beautiful, beautiful thought. He's connecting his connection to Israel with how steady state the universe is in. He says, if ever the sun stops rising, if ever the earth stops turning, if ever you can search out all the expanse of the universe, and if ever you can dig down and find the foundations of the earth and discover it all, then I'll forget about Israel. But before that, there's not a chance. There's no way I'll cast off my people. It's just not going to happen. And so those theologians out there who would say that God has left his people Israel and he's not going to deal with them any longer, they're not understanding some passages, I would think, unless I'm really seriously misunderstanding something here. But he's pointing out the fact that my promise is 100% sure as the sun will rise tomorrow, as sure as the rise and fall of the tides. That's how sure my promise is to Israel. Genesis chapter 8, verse 21 through 22. And the Lord smelled a sweet savor, and the Lord said in his heart, I will not again curse the ground any more for man's sake. For the imagination of man's heart is evil from his youth. Neither will I again smite any more every living thing, as I have done, while the earth remaineth, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, and summer and winter, and day and night shall not cease. You know, the global warming, climate change people out there. Obviously, I'm not denying that we should take better care of the planet. I shared with you already my view of how we should care for the planet with our methods of farming and all that kind of stuff. But these people think that if we don't stop doing what we're doing, we're going to stop the sun from shining. We're going to stop the earth from spinning. And our world's just going to come to a catastrophic end. Obviously, they've got more terminology than that. But here he says, unless God smites the earth again, which I think will happen with the fires at the end when the earth is consumed, from this day, from the day of the floods till the end, this will happen. Seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night, they will not cease. There's such a beautiful system in place that we have that we cannot even destroy it. We can mess it up. We can contaminate certain aspects of it, but God seems to have a system that cleans it and purifies and cleans it up. And one day He's going to come and burn it all up and start fresh, and it will be a beautiful new earth wherein dwells righteousness. So later on, man is created and said to be created in the image of God. But if you think of the expanse of the earth and the beautiful order of everything else, the expanse of the universe, everything clearly is created in God's image to some degree. And we can learn so much about who God is through observing nature. Psalm 148, verse 1 through 5. Just a few more verses here. Praise ye the Lord. Praise ye the Lord from the heavens. Praise Him in the heights. Praise ye Him, all His angels. Praise ye Him, all His host. Praise ye Him, sun and moon. Praise Him, all ye stars of light. Praise Him, ye heavens of heavens, and ye waters that be above the heavens. Let them praise the name of the Lord, for He commanded, and they were created. Imagine that being sung by thousands of voices in some beautifully orchestrated piece where it's just praise, praise, praise. Well, if you were to listen with God's ears, you would hear that routinely because it's the sun and the moon and the stars and all the order that was from the beginning. It is giving praise to God. These things give praise to God continuously. And just to point out one more time that God is not in the business of allowing light to dwell together with darkness, we see verses in the New Testament that speak to the same thing when it comes to spiritual light. 1 Thessalonians 5, verse 5 through 13 says, Ye are all children of light and the children of the day. We are not of the night nor of the darkness, and have no fellowship with the unfruitful works of darkness, but rather reprove them. I think that's actually a skip to the book of Ephesians. Did I mess up my verses there? But rather reprove them, for it is a shame even to speak of those things which are done of them in secret. But all things are reproved, are made manifest by the light, for whatsoever doth make manifest is light. So you can go back to creation, the sun and the moon, and learn a lot about how we should live our life here and now. If you have darkness that you're hiding, if there's anything that you feel is off limits, something that you feel like you need to hide because it feels dirty or ugly or you don't want to expose it, you would be wise to bring it out. Maybe not to everybody, maybe not to public, but bring it out to somebody so that light can shine on it. So somebody can offer some wisdom and insight to your situation. So there's physical darkness that requires light for us to see and walk. And there's spiritual darkness that requires us to expose it to the light for us to be able to walk free from it and not stumble in the spiritual darkness. Verse 19, in the evening and the morning were the fourth day. So I'm going to go through one more day here, and then I'll start there next time, starting with day 6 on the next time I'm up here. Chapter 1, verse 20. God said, "Let the waters bring forth abundantly the moving creature that hath life, and the fowl that may fly above the earth in the open firmament of heaven. And God created great whales and every living creature that moveth, which the waters brought forth abundantly after their kind, and every winged fowl after his kind. And God saw that it was good." And again, as I told the children the story, you got to picture suddenly out of water, a great whale bursts into the scene, if you were able to be there to see it. And these little tiny minnows and little fish that just suddenly appear, and they're swimming this way and that. And then the amazing part about this is not only do fish and sea creatures appear, all the different things suddenly pop out of the water, but the birds and the fowls of the air come flying up out of the water. So a massive eagle just shooting out. Maybe there was pterodactyls at that time. We don't know for sure, right, boys and girls? Flying up out of the water. Imagine that scene as the water starts bringing forth all these things. And now you can see, because there's light, the sun is there. All these sea creatures suddenly appearing on the surface of the planet, things that we've never even seen before, and many of the great fish and whales that we have seen and fish that we've caught, and many things, they all began right there. And every winged fowl came bursting up out of the water. One website I read said that they've identified 230,000 different species of sea creatures, but we're anticipating that there could possibly be millions more of different species. There's so much diversity under the sea that we haven't even begun to discover. God really almost seems to be a little excessive here, right? Like, easy, God. You could have done like 6,000. We'd have been like, wow. But millions and millions of different species? What are you doing here? Why such diversity? Because we'll never search it out. Even if humans occupy this planet for another 10,000 or 1 million years, we will never discover all that God has hidden on this earth. The whole earth is full of His glory. The angels cry that out, the seraphim and cherubim. As they fly around the throne of God, they say, "Holy, holy, holy is the Lord God of Almighty." The whole earth is full of His glory. This planet, look around, people. Get off your screens. Go outside. Look at the nature around us. You'll see that the whole earth is full of His glory. Think about it. Discover. You children, you're so smart. You have so much potential. Go discover. Go learn. Grow your mind, expand it, see the glory and nature of God, and the nature that God has created. Be inquisitive. People have studied fowls, and a while back they thought there was 8,000 or 9,000 species of birds, and then all of a sudden they discovered a bunch more, and then also certain ones that they thought were the same species found out that they were different species. They've now concluded that there is 18,000 plus species of birds. So much to watch. You think of these bird watchers, well, that's like a boring thing to do. You go out and watch birds. I'm sure it must be very, very intriguing to see some of these different birds and the way that they function and how they create their habitats and how they mate and all the different things. I'm sure you've seen that on those nature videos too, right? These birds that blow up their wings and try to induce or seduce the females, and the peacocks with their massive tails, and just so many wonders in nature and with the fowls of the earth, of the air. I think the whole idea is just God's trying to say, you got nothing. Even if you spend your whole lifetime studying one species and document it, write it all down, and leave it for the next generation, they have time to study one species maybe, and kind of come to a really good understanding of how it functions. And yet they still, when you hear them talk, they're like, we're not quite sure why this is, but this is just how it is. We've just discovered it, but we can't really say why it is. And that's how it's going to be all the time. We're always going to find that our knowledge is very limited in nature and creation, and God is completely fully discoverable. I think God had us in mind when He made all of this. He didn't want us ever to get bored. I heard one person say many years ago, he asked how things were, and he said, it's just kind of boring today. He says, Christians should never be bored. It's like a rebuke to me. I remember ever since that day, I don't think I've ever said again, I'm just bored. Obviously, there are times when I feel a little bored and there's not much to do, but there is so much to do. There's so much to go and discover and learn. We should never be sitting around with our mind in neutral and just blank all the time. We should be learning and growing and expanding and helping and ministering and serving. There's much, much to do all the time. We shouldn't be bored. And God blessed them. Verse 22, saying, be fruitful and multiply and fill the waters in the seas and let the fowl multiply on the earth, and the evening and the morning were the fifth day. Notice, just as a side note, when it says God blessed them, he didn't say, bless you, animals. You know, when you put a blessing on someone, you don't have to say, bless you, Tony. God bless you. That's not the only way to say a blessing. Remember, John shared this with me many years ago. He was saying that when you say you're worshiping God, you don't have to say the words worship. You don't have to sing a song. Or you don't have to, when you're honoring Him, you don't have to use the word honor. Lord, I honor you. You don't have to do that. Simply by living a life that's honoring to Him, you are honoring Him. And so when God is blessing these critters, He says to them, be fruitful. That's a blessing. So on wedding days, when I pray over the young couple there, I prayed to the God that God would cause them to be fruitful. That's a blessing. Fruitful in every way. Ministerially, where they could minister and serve other couples and other young people, but also, and for sure, I want God to bless them with children, because children are a blessing. In our modern culture, children have become such a curse to most people that a lot of young girls that I've heard in the last few years say, I don't ever want kids. You are operating completely outside of what God has designed you for. You are designed to bear fruit. Obviously, we can put numbers on it. We can talk about this, talk about that. But clearly, it's a blessing. And it's good for you. Will it be hard? Of course it will. Every good thing is hard. But God has designed you to be fruitful. And that's what the same thing He says. You know, when you look at creation, look at nature, look at animals, their existence seems to be almost futile. They live to eat and to create homes where they can stay safe and dry, and then they reproduce. They have no hopes, they have no plans, they have no visions, they have no homes that they're going to build. They're like big skyscrapers. They're not going to connect with other races, or they're just, all they do is reproduce and eat and sleep, and that's their existence. And they are completely faithful to the command and the blessing that God gave them here. You know, notice that it's actually not a command. I just noticed that now. He didn't say, I command you to go and be fruitful. He says, here's a blessing I'm going to put upon these creatures. Go, be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth, fill the seas, multiply in the earth. Just reproduce like crazy. I want the whole world full of